Vav.
No, we still have a ways to go before we get.
Well, you passed this section.
It's a good step for sure. Okay, so we are holding at Mishna Berura Dalid, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Shay's, let me go back and look where we're holding up. So we're talking now. Before we were talking about what's the story with a panel that you use to put against the window, or whether it's a panel or if you put a shirt, if you say a t-shirt or whatever it is, different things, and what's the story with that? Now we have another thing is how about with different things that you use to lock a door? So if you have a reed, right, that you fix it in such a way that you can close the door. So we said that you don't have to tie it to the door to show that it's a lock, but still, being that it looks more similar to building, right, to the malacha of building, more so than what closing up a window, because a window, it's more, I guess, more frequent that it's moved and unmoved. So it's not enough that you think about it before Shabbos that you're designating it for this purpose, because remember, by the window, the whole problem is that what if it's muktzah? We're not worried so much that it looks like you're doing binyan, like you're doing building, which is not prohibited. Rather, by the window, it's more so the concern of you have to make sure that the thing that you're using is not a muktzah thing, right? That it's not something that's prohibited to move. Which anything that has no use when Shabbos comes in, or has no use over Shabbos, whatever it is, or until the point that Shabbos came in, it was an item that didn't have a permissible use. That's muktzah. You're not allowed to move it. So that's the problem by the window. But here, by the door locking thing, by the reed to lock the door, besides for the idea, if you think about it before Shabbos, so fine, it's not muktzah. You've avoided that problem. However, we have another problem, is that it looks like building, and that's why you have to actually fix it. You have to do some sort of thing to it to make it, to fix it so that it's for this use. Says the Mishnah Berura sheskinu that he fixed. Hainu shetaychava eitzel adelis by kaisel, meaning that he tucked it in the wall near the door. V'loishe seiger by es hamizgeres oich shnei chatzai delis, but not that he bolts the lock, or bolts, let's say that the meaning bolts the lock is in the case of one door, right? Or alternatively, if you have a double door, how you put like a little rod against, you'll put a little piece of stick like in the loops by the doors.
Gotcha.
So meaning
Right.
That's not what we're talking about. And we're also not talking about, like, for example, what he means by sticking it in one side of the door is like, let's say you have like like those latches that go for a padlock.
Yeah.
So something like that means you're sticking the door. So we're not talking about that. Rather, we're talking about that you have a door that can open this way, right? Like it can open, let's say, towards me, and I stick a peg in the wall that blocks it from now opening. That's what we're talking about here. That he's sticking it into the wall. And therefore, it's similar to the peg, which we're gonna bring up soon. Meaning, if we're talking about something that you stick into the two loops of the double door, or you actually have it where it's like stuck into a thing it actually bolts the lock itself. That's not where the problem is. The problem is when you're sticking the peg in the wall, because that appears like construction. Whereas the other two things that the Mishnah Berura is mentioning, so he's just clarifying what are we talking about with this rod, right? With this piece of wood or this piece of reed or whatever it is. What he's talking about is not that you're using it to lock the door directly, but you're using it to block the door via sticking it into the wall, into a hole in the wall. Which in this case, the problem is it looks like you are building. So the note over here is that in the case of in the other cases where he's putting a rod across the two doors rather than in the wall, or where it's a rod that sticks into the lock itself on the door, in those cases there's no impression of baina. Why? Because you're not inserting it into the wall. It's when you're putting it in the wall that then it looks like it's baina. You see this one. So we said mental designation is not enough. That even if we assume that the purpose of mentally designating is to avoid the impression of baina, right? Because remember, by the window you also have those things, those same concerns. But here, but by the window panel, the intention before Shabbos gets rid of both of those concerns. It gets rid of the muktzah concern, and it gets rid of the it looks like baina concern. Why in that case does it get rid of the baina concern? Just mental designation, because it's less of a similarity to baina, right? And the same would be held true by the rod if it were across the double doors or in the door lock itself. But in the case where it goes in the hole in the wall, it's more similar, and therefore the mental designation is not enough, because the rod, unlike the window, is actually inserted into the building, and it therefore resembles the peg, which we will talk about below, which is the one. Remember the peg of the neger that the carpenter's peg that you stick into the ground. So that's why mental designation is not enough, but rather he has to have done some sort of a action with it, fixing it to this purpose. Mishnah Berura Hey ain't tzarich shikashenu v'chulu. However, he does not have to tie it to the door. Tzarich leimer nami ain't tzarich. It should say it also need not be. Why nami? Because he said before by the window, afilu imein kosher. So anyway, it's a small difference there. I'm not sure why. Maybe. Why does he feel there's such a need to say that? That is, just as the panel need not be tied to the wall before Shabbos, the rod also not be tied. However, still mental designation isn't enough, like you said before. Fine.
So it's physical action, basically.
It's a very whatever. The Mishnah Berura is being very, very particular about the wording here. But he says that just like the window panel doesn't need to be tied, this also doesn't need to be tied. However, unlike the window panel, the mental designation isn't enough. You have to have physically designated it for this thing before Shabbos. I guess maybe stuck it into the wall once or something like that. Mishnah Berura Vav Sheisaknanu lekach, that he should fix it for this. And according to Rashi, you have to fix it not only for this, but you fix it for something else. You have to fix it for something else to be a keli for something else. According to Rabbi Tam, no, it's enough that you just fix it for this thing. Anyway, she's like, Mishnah Berura says that you should fix it for this. Hainu the kevon that since shetiknoi, that since he fixed it, or he adapted it for this purpose, yesh alav teiras kli v'yetz miteiras binyan. So now it has the status of a vessel, of a kli, which means of non-raw materials, but rather of a usable object. And therefore, it's removed from the being categorized as an item that's made for boina, that's made for building. And both Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam agree with this thing. But just that Rashi requires that you have to adapt it for some other use, that this use itself is not enough. And according to Rabbeinu Tam, no, you only have to adapt it to be fitting to lock the door with, such as sticking it in the hole or in the wall and making sure that it's actually it doesn't need to be shaved down or something like this. And okay, it fits good in this wall or whatever. And so it has to be fitting to be used for this purpose. That according to Rabbeinu Tam, that's enough for it to be removed for the from being
of construction.
Construction, fitting for construction, and therefore being that it'll look like it's being used for construction.
So speaking of Rabbeinu Tam, Zion.
Yeah, that once there's the note here, because like we mentioned before, that we can assume a person is not willing to leave a kli attached to a structure on a permanent basis, right? That's the reason why when something is a kli, it takes it out of being fitting for binyan, because something that's usable, like say a pen, and I put up a pen is problematic for other purposes. But let's say a pen, I stick it. What's it called? Well, I'm not going to leave my pen there forever. Well, some yeshivas I've seen things like this, but in general,
I think this is a good example. For example, most pens that stay in a spot, they're chained to the spot. Yeah. There's something that makes it okay. This is now a part of this,
right?
But even when it's chained to the desk, it's still a tool. It's still
no. But this is what. But I think I think maybe the other way around. He's saying that's why you don't have to tie it in this case. So usually I would have to tie it to show that it's a tool for the door, because right now, no, it's no longer a device of construction. I've tied it to the door, showing that it's a tool for the door.
Right.
But if it's a tool for but if I've already made it a tool, I don't have to then also tie it. Why? Because it's a tool. I'm not going to leave it there. It's a usable tool, which maybe is why Rashi insists that it has to be a tool for something else also, because maybe that, like, in other words, if it's a tool that's for the door, I might talk and never move it from there. but if it's a tool for something else, right? It even more stresses that, like, obviously I'm like, if I made it into a spoon also, well, I'm not going to leave the spoon there. There's olives to mash after all, you know. so perhaps that's why Rashi is more stringent about it, feels that you have to make it for a tool into something else. Anyway, so Zion Rabbeinu Tam, according to Rabbeinu Tam, so the Mishna Berura is psak here. And this comes from the Magen Avram and Elia Rabbah, is that in the time of need you can go like Rabbeinu Tam. The Chain Tzasam Shulchan Aruch Le'el is in Yud, because in 308:10 the Mechaber paskined like Rabbeinu Tam that you don't have to make it a vessel for something else. Making it a vessel for this thing is enough. Let me just see if this note is anything. What's it called? That is a Shulchan Aruch. There states simply that in order for a nondescript cover, right? So he's not talking about this exact situation, but he says there that in order for a nondescript cover to attain the status of a kli, it must be adapted before Shabbos for purposes of serving as a cover. Right, so he doesn't say there it has to be adapted for us to serve a purpose other than this cover that it's being, but rather just that it has to be adapted for this purpose and it's going to be used for. So, which would imply that he holds like Rabbeinu Tam. Interesting note is that over there, the purpose of adapting it was to remove the muktzah status, whereas in our case, he's trying to remove the resemblance to Baina. The Pri Megadim, however, says that the Gemara in Shabbos clearly equates these two issues. So which means that even though sometimes you see they're leaning into one thing or another, but according to Pri Megadim, they're basically the same. They're really one and the same issue. It's just a question of, in other words, which makes sense, really, if you think about it, because the same thing that makes it not muktzah is the same thing that makes it not look like binyan.
Right? Means that's the same concept, or it means they have the same weight, like the same concern.
He equates them. In other words, he kind of ties them together. They're which to a degree that makes sense. Unless something is going to really, like we'll see later, that certain things really look even more like, so maybe you're more concerned about that thing. But yeah, you could say they carry equal weight, but also they're sort of the same issue. It's like two sides of the same coin. In other words, if it's a kli, if it's a usable vessel for another purpose, it won't look like binyan. If it's a vessel that can be used for another purpose, it's also usable and it's not muktzah. So it's the same idea, but depending on the thing, it could be maybe sometimes more of one and more of the other that we're worried about with a specific item, I guess, because some items look more like.
It's two expressions of the same concern, basically, with regards to binyan. Two ways that concern expresses itself could show itself. Is how it's used versus how it looks.
They're talking two concerns. But
what I'm saying is, but in the way it's not separate. It's basically the same concern is is this for binyan or for tool? Now is it and the two ways is it's usage and how it presents itself, how it looks.
Right.
Usage and looks.
Now, I think the reason that the Pri Megadim sort of and why Bechlal this is brought up is because you don't see this brought up in other areas. It's fine, because in those areas there is no concern of baina, there is no concern of building, and therefore it's just not brought up because that aspect is not pertinent to those scenarios. Where here we're talking about baina, so we're more bringing up the idea that it looks like baina, where somewhere else we're not bringing that up because there's no concern of that particular malacha in that other case that we're talking about. But here, I agree.
Israel. Okay.
Mishna Berura test 8. Let me just go back what he's calling. So now this was going into the Ramah, that through this it's called, right, through this fixing, which meaning he could technically be talking. He's talking about really either Rashi or Rabbeinu Tam, depending on if you hold the fixing needs to be fixed for something else. But through this fixing, according to Rashi, it has to be fixed for something else, and according to Rabbeinu Tam, just for this thing. It's called a vessel that has a permissible purpose, right? A klisha malachti leheter. The melechas haneila hu leheter. Why? Because locking is allowed. You're allowed to lock. So therefore, right, which actually in the way the Mishnah Berura explains it, it would appear that the Ramah leans according to the Rabbeinu Tam. Because to Rashi, it doesn't make it. Well, what's the difference? That it's that the locking is malach leheter. He's requiring you to make it fitting for a different purpose. So it seemed that according to how the Mishnah Berura explains the Ramah here, he seems to be leaning according to Rabbeinu Tam that it's enough that you do that you fix it for this purpose. But so locking is permitted, and therefore there's no problem. See that if the rod were to not have been adopted before Shabbos, even if it was used as a lock before Shabbos, it would be forbidden to use as a lock on Shabbos. And therefore, it would be classified as a kli shemalachti l'isur, a vessel that its purpose is forbidden. This comes from Shulchan Aruch Harav, from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and Kaf HaChaim.
Nice.
Tehil the Dove doesn't seem to agree with that, but okay. And it's actually kind of interesting because I thought that that actually using it is even better than. Oh, I see what he's saying. Using it once, if using it once is better than simply mentally designating it. But that's not good. That's not good enough for this purpose, at least according to and he brings here actually the Alter Rebbe holds this is that basically there's three levels. There's designating it mentally, at least according to the Ran, that's a worse level. According to the Rosh, that's actually better than having used it once. And then there's using it once, which automatically, according to the Rosh, and it seems to be the general consensus amongst most of the poskim also, is that using it once is even better. And plus, it not only is it that it also satisfies both the opinions of the Rosh and the Ran, because the Ran holds that mental designation is worthless. However, neither of those are good enough in this case. You have to have actually adapted it. You have to have done something to adapt it, as opposed to just sticking it in the wall, like to make sure it fits. Sand a little bit. I don't know exactly what the exact guidelines are, but apparently you have to have done something, because even using it once, meaning using it once is also just a designation. It's not an adaptation. So in this case, we're requiring an adaptation rather than just a designation. So using it once is not an adaptation; it's just a designation.
Nice, I like it.
What's that?
I like it. Not an adaptation, rather a designation.
Right. So that's pointing out the difference there. Because you would think, wait a second, what if I used it once? Why would that not be good enough? And because that might be a better designation, but a designation it remains. That's test, right? 9, Mishnah Berura 9. Ayidei kach v'chulu. That he's saying that through this, it's called the klishim nati le'ater. Aval karna shemeshkin beizeisim, but a reed or a rod that you that depends if you're using a Chabad pronunciation or a Ungarish pronunciation. If it's a reed or a rod, that you shmush olives with it. Afal pisha neilim by mikri melachti leisur. Something that you use to shmush olives. This is called, even though you lock with it. Sorry, it's used to harvest olives. Even though it can be used for locking, it's called a klishim lachti leisur. This is an implement with a non-permitted use. Why? Because it's made primarily, right? That since it is, that's what it's primarily used for something that's not allowed. You're not allowed to harvest on Shabbos. So we follow its primary usage. So the Mishnah Berura, he's looking to contrast a rod that's been adapted as a lock, that according to Rabbeinu Tam, and a rod that has the status of a vessel used to harvest olives. That if it's been adapted as a lock, then it's klisha malachti leheter. It's been adapted you've turned it into an implement with a permitted use. Why? Because you're making you've adapted it into a lock, and locking is allowed. So you just turned it into something that the primary function of it is a permissible function, locking a door. However, a rod that is used to harvest olives, which, by the way, if you ever in the oldie timey days, right, they didn't have those big machines with the machines with the finger, that the tickle machines. You ever seen those? It's a tractor, and on the sides, and then use them for oranges also. I think for olives also. They have big nets that go underneath, and there's space to fit in between the trees and stuff. And then on top of these nets, it has these tickly hands that go up like this. It's long, these long, flexible things, and it goes between the trees and tickles them. It goes like this between the trees, and it shakes the things, and the things fall down. So back then they didn't have tickly tractors, right? Back then the tickly tractor didn't go round and round. So what do? They would use rods to, right? Because remember, harvesting an olive isn't like harvesting a wheat; it's up there. And so they would have rods, and they would knock the olives off the trees with they put a net on the floor under, and then they knocked all the olives into the net, and then they gather up the nets, and they
straw once, and I did that. We climbed up into the tree though. We shook them. Yeah, we put the nets all down around on the floor, and then we just.
Right, so you would use a rod, so you don't have to climb into the tree. You just bang it. So that's a klisha malachti le'isur. It's a prohibited use item because its primary use is something that you can't do on Shabbos, which is one of the 39 malachas of kaitzer, right? Cutting, harvesting. So even though let's say this rod can in theory be used as a lock, right? There's no reason I can't take this rod and pull it, put it stick it in a hole, whatever, by the door. But it's a klisha malachti le'isur. Oh wait, why can it be used? It may use a lock. Oh, here's why it can be used as a lock. It can be used as a lock because a klisha malachti le'isur, it can be moved l'tzayich gufay. Right, it can be used in a way in order to make use of a secondary permitted function, meaning you're not using it for its function, but you're rather using the self of the item. Oh, you got olive rod. There's the olive rod
in Eretz Yisrael. This is right outside of Tzvas.
Oh, is that one of your pictures?
Yeah, this is one of mine. This is from. I just went and quickly found it.
How did you know you were going to need it now?
I did it, Baruch Hashem. I have thank God. But yeah, I have everything by month, so it's easy for me to find. But yeah, this is mamish, this long rod. This is I don't know, it's like a 30-foot rod.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's the rod. Not bad. Okay, so that's A. And B, there is no so first of all, you're allowed to move it for tzayich gufay, right? For making use of it for a different purpose than its primary one. And B, we're not worried about that it looks like building because even though it's a klisha malachti le'isur, even though it's an implement which its primary use is something that's forbidden, but it's an implement. It's not raw building tools, building materials. So it doesn't look like baina because you don't think it doesn't appear, like we said before, everybody knows you're not going to leave a kli, you're not going to leave an implement that's used for something else in a permanent way. Still, however, this would not grant it the status of klisha malachti leheter. Why? Because its primary purpose is still olives. So it comes out that if you adapt a rod as a vessel for stirring olives, which, right, if you remember, that's one of the things that Rashi mentions. Right, he mentioned what was the two things? Was stirring olives and cracking nuts. Which actually, according to the Alter Rebbe, the cracking nuts one wouldn't work because the Alter Rebbe, like we see in the Siddur, right before Kabbalah Shabbos, he brings down certain things that we should be very, very careful of on Shabbos, even though Ledina you're allowed to do them. So one of those is nuts. The Alter Rebbe does not feel we should be using shelled nuts at all on Shabbos because there are all kinds of complications that arise from them and the status of the shell after you've taken it and how you take the nut.
Muktzah, yeah.
So, yeah. But in either case, Ledina, you're allowed to crack nut. You're allowed to do it. So if we adapt it into a vessel for stirring olives, like Rashi says, it would be a kli shemalachta le'isur. Rashi explains that after olives are harvested, so now he's going to explain what this stirring thing is. Rashi in Gemara Shabbos explains that after olives are harvested, they're piled into a large vat where they become soft. I guess they start under their own weight and they start breaking down or whatever it is. They become soft. And they're more easily pressed for their oil. A rod is typically used to check whether the olives are soft enough by stirring the olives and checking the rod to see if it has oil deposits on it. And then based on how much the oil deposits, they know when it's ready. Since the olives are not edible, they're muktzah, and therefore a vessel that is meant to move them is also muktzah, at least based on its primary use. And so it's a kli shemalachta le'isur. The Matzah Shekel, which is on the Magen Avram, stresses that when the Ramah says that the adapted rod is a kli shemalachta leheter, he's specifically talking about a rod adapted as a lock, in accordance with Rabbeinu Tam's opinion.
Directly as a lock and not a multi-use rod. It's only or exclusively, I should say.
So what's he saying then? He's saying that you can use it. He's saying you can use it as a. I see what he's saying. He's saying actually it's not. He's saying wait a second. He's saying why is he saying it's made a kli shemalachta leheter? According to Rashi's two things, they're kli shemalachta le'isur. They're things that their main function is prohibited. Now he says even so, you actually are allowed to use them for the reasons he gave above. Right, the reasons being that you can move it, let's say, at gufay, because to use it for a secondary purpose, meaning assuming you designated it as such before Shabbos, and you also don't have to worry that it's going to look like baina. So you're allowed to use this olive mixing rod as long as you designated it before Shabbos for this purpose. You're allowed to use this olive mixing rod. His question is, why does the Ramah say that it's kli shemalachta leheter? Even if it's not kli shemalachta leheter, this works. And he's answering. He's talking about the words of Rabbeinu Tam. That Rabbeinu Tam is specifically talking about not because Rabbeinu Tam holds that you don't have to change it, adapt it as a different implement. You can just adapt it as a lock and nothing more. And therefore, a lock is kli shemalachta leheter, and that's why the Ramah uses that wording. And you're allowed to move it. Ahainu afilu sheloi l'tzerich gufei mekaymi rach tzerich tzas. That even if it's not for the need, l'tzerich gufei or mekaymi, meaning for the need, like you said before, tzerich gufei means for using it as for a secondary purpose. That's not its main thing. Or tzarich mekayim means I need the place that it's taking up. That these are two things that allow you to move something on Shabbos. But just as for a slight need. V'zahu shetzin Ramah, and this is what the Ramah is like. How do you say tzion? Like underlining, highlighting, stressing. Like it's explained before in 308. Aval binyanenu, that you need it. We're dealing with it. We're talking about it in terms of its use as a lock. The whole tzayir gufay mutter, that it's for the need. This is l'tzayir gufay, for the need of itself as a secondary purpose. So therefore, it is fine. Even sheish olav teiras kli afilu emelimsik bezeisim, that it has the status of a vessel, even if you are going to use it for harvesting olives. Why? Like we said before, that he needs it. L'tzayir gufay.
Google Translate says shetzayin means to indicate. Indicated. It's either way, it's the Rama pointed out,
Okay.
brought up.
I thought it also means like to underline, like it says, like that it's
Right, I feel like I've heard it in that context more.
Like he's stressed, but I guess the same thing. In other words, he's pointing your focus to.
He's pointing out. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
indicated. He pointed out.
Right, indicated. Okay, yeah, that works.
It's not indicated. Does not necessarily mean it's not implied. It's like it could
right.
Mean,
I'm pointing something out. Yeah,
stronger. Like
I'm showing you something.
Anyway, so. Yeah, because it's Serach Gufay.
Right. So that is that a klisha malachti le'iser, right, may be moved, like we said before, l'tzayirach gufay, l'tzayirach mekaymai, for the need of itself, with a secondary permitted use, right, even though its primary use is a forbidden one, or alternatively for the need of its place that it's in, that you need to move it because let's say you have let's say you have a table with a record player on it. You need to have your Suda Shabbos there, and you need to move it over or something. This kind of thing.
Right. Or somebody left the olive whacking stick in the middle of the dining room. It doesn't look nice during your Shabbos meal. You gotta clear it out. You gotta clean it off.
Now that since the rod is according to Ramah, it doesn't make a difference because since he's really primarily referring to Rabbeinu Tam and he's referring to the lock. So the rod in this case is a kli shemalachti leheter. So it may be so you can move it for any purpose at all, even for its own protection, right? As opposed to by Rashi's scenario with the rod, where you can only use it l'tzayirach gufay or l'tzayirach mekaymei for its use as a secondary purpose or for the need of its place. However, in the case of the lock by Rabbeinu Tam, you could actually move it for that. That's why he says because he's continuing in the vein of talking about the Rabbeinu Tam, that it's enough to designate to adapt it for being a lock. Yeah. The issue of whether a rod is a klisha malachta leheter or le'iser has no bearing on whether or not one can use it as a lock. It's only relevant to whether you'd be allowed to move it for other purposes. So basically, in the case, the difference between the case of using of Rabbeinu Tam's thing that you adapted it for a lock and Rashi's thing that you adapted it for like an olive stick, is that in the Rabbeinu Tam scenario, you could actually now move this rod for anything you want because it's a lock. That's what it is. You've adapted it into a lock, and a lock is mutter, and therefore even you don't want people. You don't want that might be l'tzayirach mekayim if you don't want people tripping over it, but even whatever you don't want the kids to break it. Which is funny because you use it for a lock to keep robbers out, but yet obviously your kids will still find some way to break it. So, so you want to put it on a shelf. So, but in the case of the olive stick, you can't do that. In the case of the Rabbi Tam, where it's a lock, that's what it is. You can do that because the lock is an implement that its primary use is a permissible use, and the olive stick it's only its secondary use is the permissible use, but its primary use is a non-permissible use. The Mishna Berura 11.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just see what he was talking about there. So he was saying that now, on the other hand, this spike, what do you call it? The contractor's thing, the carpenter's peg.
No, right. Or peg.
That
Right.
you knock it into the bottom, into the floor. You into like what's it called? The threshold. Right. That you knock it into the threshold. That looks more like binyan. Like that looks more like building. Right.
You know what it just made me think of, just to picture this? I
Yeah.
didn't think of it a good example yesterday. An example, you have this by doors, not using a makeshift one, but you have, especially like by double doors. Like my in-laws have their front double doors, right? One is just a regular door, but you can open the second door by undoing the peg at the top and the bottom.
Yeah.
Bottom, right? It goes into a hole. It's like a little latch.
I can actually picture that very door right now. We've all been through Chabad at Wallingford Street many times. We know those doors well.
When I was trying to think yesterday, I'm like, I'm very visual. I try to picture things, and I'm like, I just couldn't think of it. And
no,
now,
by the way, that's
exactly
that's important because ultimately, it's great at carpenter's peg. How many people nowadays for their front door knock a carpenter's peg into the floor? So like ultimately, we need to be able to apply this to modern day scenarios.
Right. Well, how many carpenters even have what this carpenter's peg is? Like,
right, it's some sort of a spike or whatever. Right. It's I don't know. I don't even know what this actual
dowel.
Peg is. Maybe back in the day they used to like knock dowels into connectings.
I just Googled carpenter's peg, and you know what comes up? It's apparently for crossword puzzles. Like it won't even give me something practical. It's just apparently it's used in crossword puzzles, meaning probably very difficult because
what does it call it?
Something that used to be used, but not really so much anymore.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's just I mean
we're gonna have to take a trip to the Museum of Natural History.
I will say when I go to images, it does show like some of the the pieces in IKEA furniture. Little round thing,
the dowels.
So that is a dowel. That's technically a carpenter's peg,
or sometimes called a peg. Sometimes called a peg. Sometimes it's called a dowel. But you use dowels like to connect.
Essentially, a dowel is a carpenter's peg. It's the same.
Okay,
that's exactly.
So because in fact that's what they use. If you look in some like all wood drawers, well maybe IKEA are not all wood ones also, where they make you put the pegs in. But that's different because IKEA pegs are just a loose thing, and then you have the screw that tightens it. Whereas if you look at some all wood like if you like Amish type construction, the peg is actually it's because remember we're talking about an all wood thing, it's strong, and the peg is actually something very tight that's knocked in, and that's actually holding it. Sometimes they put paste around it like a glue paste. To really hold it in, but it's a very tight thing, and then they sand off the edge to be flush with the edge. But if you look, you can actually see like the dots of the the circles of the pegs.
Right.
Similarly in like log cabin type construction and things like that, you probably have stuff like that also. Depending on the whatever. And Bechlal, back in the oldie timey days, when they were putting wood boards, let's say they were making a house with wood boards, they weren't using they weren't pulling out the do-alt drill and calling the guy at Lowe's
screws
and saying,
nails.
What's the best wood screws for this? That'll what's it called? The elements. No, there would be it's pegs. The old time woodwork is pegs hold it together.
Right.
So yeah. Even not so long ago.
It's so long ago. So we're saying even nowadays there's things like it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Cool.
so
Yeah.
Reitzel Leimar,
So
meaning to
Leibniz.
say,
That's something.
Shenira Kishar Negarim Yisedis Shenaitz Bakesel. Right? That this peg it has a closer resemblance to the regular kinds of pegs and spikes that are used to stick into a wall. Right? That you knock into a
Like we
wall.
were just saying, these dowels could be used for building shelves and walls.
Right. So therefore they're more similar to that kind of thing. I.e., it looks
So that's what he's
more
saying.
like
So it
buildings.
looks like a construction thing.
Yeah.
Yesh b'zeh mishum binyan.
Right. The yesh bazeh, meaning that in the thing that it looks like, if you're doing the thing that it looks like, it's binyan. It's
the category of construction.
It's mamish violate. It involves violating binyan actually. And that's why in this case we require that it would have to be tied. Right, the thrusting a peg into a threshold bears a very close resemblance to a typical act of building, driving pegs or spikes into a wall. Therefore, one cannot remove the impression of baina, because that's what we're worried about here. Remember, we're not worried about anything he does with this lock. We're already not doing all these instances we've already established in the beginning of the introduction. We're not talking about we're not worried here about the biblical violation of baina. We're worried about the rabbinical violations, whether of muktzah, right, of moving an impermissible item, or of it looking like baina. So what we're trying to do here, everything here is a question of how to what degree do we need to go to remove the impression of baina, that it looks like baina. So in this thing, because it looks like a typical act of building, it more so looks like baina than our prior cases. So you cannot remove that impression just by adapting the peg as a lock, like you were able to with the rod. And so therefore you have to tie it to the wall. And this removes the impression of it being permanently inserted into the ground. Why? Because if it was permanently inserted into the ground, why did you tie a string going from it to the wall? Like there's no, what do you have a string for? It's knocked into the ground. So you're not looking to remove it. I'm not sure if the string is just as a siman, or it symbolizes pulling it out or something like that.
Maybe it's just saying that it has multifunction. It's a multi-use thing.
Not even multi-use. It means it's showing that my intent was not to knock it in there permanently.
I have constant usage for it. I'm not just knocking it in.
That it's going to be going in and out. That it's a temporary insertion, basically.
It's like the equivalent of not taking the tags off of a piece of clothing. Symbolizes I'm not necessarily going to keep it.
Right. I might return this until my wife does me a favor and pulls the tags off them. Not on Shabbos, obviously, but before Shabbos, to make sure I'll be able to wear the shirt on Shabbos. It's a good thing it fits, because now I'm keeping it.
All right. Okay. So.
Okay. Yeah. So that's that one next at Mishna Berura Yud Beis.
So we do what we can to make it table the kli.
Let me see, where was Yud Beis? So then he moved on to talk about how it needs to be tied. So if it's the kind of peg that's wider at the top, meaning that it's more possible to think that maybe it's kind of more like an implement usable for other things. So we're talking about as opposed to being like just a peg that's straight. It's a peg that imagine like a dowel sort of thing, but that gets wider at the top. Maybe kind of like we do today with our nails. there's nails with a wider top and a thinner top, depending on its purpose. So when it's wider at the top, then it is more similar to a vessel, we said, than a peg that's not wide at the top. So Shadaim Lekli, it's similar to a vessel. That Ahainu the Kavan the Klihu Lo Yehavi Kibinyan, that since it's a vessel, it resembles building less so than one that's not wide at the top. The nidola keldul fisham misimisham, that it's clear to people that it's there temporarily, meaning that the knobbed peg's resemblance to a kli even again, this thing really, it actually is a carpenter's peg. It's not a vessel. However, here we're not actually worried about if it's a vessel or not. Our worry is the midrabanan thing. Does it look like a vessel or not? It's all about what it looks like here. The whole idea here. So since it resembles to a kli, it makes it a kli in the sense that there's no concern for the impression of baina. It comes from the Beis Yosef. Others explain that the knobbed peg resembles a true kli, and since a true kli is not subordinate to the structure, therefore the peg's resemblance to a kli mitigates the impression. And this is in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, as well as the Aruch HaShulchan. Is that what's in other words, what's the which it's kind of the same thing, but they're adding a step here. And they're saying that since it resembles a kli, so and a kli is something that is not subordinate to the structure, meaning like it's not filling a purpose for the structure. So therefore, you won't get. But the bottom line, I think, is the same: is that the fact that it's wide at the top, the appearance of it is that it's not. Is that it's a kli, and therefore, like we said, our initial assumption is that a person will not leave a kli on a permanent basis somewhere. So therefore, it's obvious that it's temporary. Mishna Berura 13. Right, so we said so we said that in the case where in this case where it has a gluster on the top, it widens out or has a knob on top or whatever it is, where it's not straight. It's similar to a vessel, and it appears more like a vessel than one that doesn't have that, and therefore you can tie it even with a thin string. Even we said a string that's not really capable, even if it's just laying on the ground and there's a string tied to it, and even though the string is not even capable of really properly supporting its weight, that's good enough. That's good enough of a siman. Again, remembering that the whole thing here is for impressions. Mashma the al kolpanim kosher mihu ba'inan. So this implies is that it needs to be tied either way. Meaning, even though it has a knob. Right, meaning when we're saying it can be tied even with a cord that doesn't support it, even when it's laying on the ground, but it still does have to be tied. even with that thin string. And this is what the Taz rules. That this tying of the tying of the peg is critical to this being able to use it. ובספר אליהו רבה כוסף דלעיס הצדק יש לסמוך על המקילים על די גלוסטרה כיוון שהוא כלי אף בלי קשירה כלל. The Elia Rabba, however, says that in the situation of need, you can rely on those that are lenient, not like the Taz, and they permit using it because it has a glustera. It widens out. It looks like a kli, and therefore, even if it's not tied, so unlike the Taz that says that this thing that he's saying that it's okay even with a small string, with a very thin string, that the Taz holds no, but you actually need that string, or you can't or no. But there are those that are more lenient than the Taz, that say you don't need to actually tie it. If it has the wide head, you can. I guess their logic is what's the point of tying it with a thin string that can't even support it. It's just coming to tell us you don't need the wide string like the one without the non-wide peg needs, and the Eli Rabbi says that we can rely on them in a place of need. Avo beveir gira mashma the mitzadi ledina kataz, but the Beir Hagira he implies that he sides halachically, he sides with the Taz that no, you have to tie it. Ve'i ma'neger mechubel adeles u'meishon eisv teichen bachur mutar lekuli alma av bli kshira. This comes from Adam. However, if the peg is attached to the door and you just pull it and put it into the hole, then all opinions would permit using it if it's not tied. Meaning, this whole question of whether it's tied or of whether it needs to be tied or not, that's when it's loose. It's a loose peg. Yeah. Then I have to tie. Then, according to the Taz, I have to tie it. According to the Yerabba, in the case of need, we can go like those who are Mekil. According to the Gira, we should hold like the Taz always. We should not be Mekil. However, when it's attached to the door, like let's say you have a ring on the door, right? And or something like that, and the peg is in there, and then whatever it is, you have all you do is pull it down into the hole, or I guess
like modern day thing. It's just
like those sticks, the
screwed on.
Yeah. Well, like the fence stick, where and then if
the fence stick, or like I said, like the door of my in-laws, it's attached to the door.
Yeah. Well, that's different because it's mamash a kli, that's a lock.
Right. Okay. Fine.
So it's a little bit.
You say the fence stick, for example.
So this is
the stick I have for my driveway fence.
Like in the oldie timey days where maybe they didn't like the guy didn't have a metal thing like that. So instead he just fixed some kind of basically he turned it into that.
But here's the thing. The stick we have for our fence in our driveway. Technically, I mean, it was made for this fence, but it's a simple metal rod. Right. But it could slide right out.
Right. That could slide out.
I can pull it all the way out.
So that's perhaps more like this, and even that's not really so much like this because that's actually made for this purpose.
Let's say I
lost the stick.
Whatever. Yeah.
Let's go back to the kids. Kids came around. They saw the stick. They said, "Hey, it comes out," and they played baseball with the stick. And they broke my window, which is now like before. That's why I need a t-shirt covering my window in the first place.
That's what you need.
And I don't have the stick, and my thing's gonna blow around in the wind. So now I find a rod or a carpenter's peg rather that has a wide head, and I put it into the holes in that door, but I can still remove it also. So that's something like that. But if it's mamish sitting in the door, then that's an obvious siman that it's a lock.
So according to everybody,
taking away its whole looking like binyan.
Right, which according to everybody,
so according to everybody,
even though it's not tied, nothing's tied. There's no string tying it.
Because the whole idea here is about what it's going to look like. Okay, well, if the peg is sitting in the door, like it's on the bottom of the door in that place, it's more obvious that like, okay, this is a lock. and therefore it doesn't look like beina. So therefore, according to everybody, it's going to be. It'll be interesting to see when we get to that what the Alter Rebbe holds when it as far as like the Taz or like the Eli Rava. Does he hold that you can that when there's a time for need, can you go by the Mekilim? Okay. Are we here just a second? We learned earlier that a rod that has been adapted as a kli, right? Now we're not talking about the carpenter's peg. Now we're going back to the rod that only needed adaptation but not tying. Can be used to lock a door even if it's not tied. There are two potential differences between the rod and the peg that we're now talking about. One, if we assume that the knobbed peg is considered mamish a kli, it's really considered a vessel. It is still not the same as a rod. Why? Because the rod which was purposely adapted as a kli. So, like for example, the stick that we were talking, the metal stick that has that L-shaped metal stick, that would be more like the rod that you've actually adapted it into that use.
You made it into bedafka for this usage kind of.
It must so therefore it has to be tied because it hasn't been adapted like the rod. And the B'si Yosef asserts that if the peg is purposely fashioned with the knobs, it would actually be permitted to use as a lock, even if it's not tied. Meaning it's not a carpenter's peg that happens to widen at the top, but rather you took this carpenter's peg and you like whatever it was, you like shaved off the bottom, the what's it called, to make it usable as this lock. He would hold in that case it doesn't even have the rule of a carpenter's peg. It has the rule of the rod. Right? Just like we said way earlier on about the bathhouse, right? That like, no, he's not talking about a bathhouse. The bathhouse is an example of a business that operates in such and such a way. But if in your area, the bathhouses don't work that way, then it's not called a bathhouse, according to what we're talking about here. So the same thing here. When he's saying a carpenter's peg, he means this peg that's generally its general use actually is not for a lock. If you took the carpenter's peg and fashioned it into a lock, it's now the same rule as the rod. The Be'er Halacha doesn't necessarily says that there are dissenting views, however, to that. So that's the first reason that there's a difference. The second reason is if we assume that the knobbed peg. So the first difference was that the rod was specifically adapted for this, whereas the peg you're using for this. It looks like a kli of some sort, but it hasn't specifically been adapted as a lock, which the rod was. So that's the first reason. The second reason is if we assume that a knobbed peg merely resembles a kli, meaning the original one is if we assume it's mamish a kli. Even though it's a vessel, it's not a vessel for this purpose. That's the one difference. The second thing is if we say that it's not really a true kli, it just resembles a kli, then we can say that the impression of beina is reduced, but it's not completely eliminated. So it's wide, so it looks less like a kli than a non-widening peg, but you have not completely eliminated it's the possibility for it to be confused with raw materials for building, and therefore you have to tie it just to make sure that it won't be mistaken as such. Okay, then that was you went to there that if the peg's attached to the door and just below, the last thing we said was if it's actually attached to the door, then it would not have to be tied at all. The Chai Adam seems to mean that if the peg is attached to the door by way of a mechanism that allows it to be slid in and out of the hole, it is as if it's tied to the door, and therefore it's permitted according to all opinions. Meaning even if you can remove it, but it's tied to some kind of a thing. You have some kind of a thing that you have in there that allows you to move the, like you said before, like let's say you have the stick that comes in and out and you lost the stick, so now you replace it with a peg, but there's a mechanism, but there's a thing that allows you to push it in and out, whatever it is. So then you're fine. 14 Yudalid Mishna Berura boy. What was the boy on? So he said that by this peg that has this peg with a bulbous head, it's good even if you tie it with a thin string, meaning even a string that is not fitting to for it to be hanging on. It won't support its weight even.
Right, you can carry with.
Yeah. That if you would try to carry it with the string, it would break.
Immediately snap.
It would snap. Yeah. It would be snappy. It would snap snappily.
Snap, crackle, pop.
Yeah. It would at least it would snap and might crackle and pop too. Well, it depends. According to the Taz, we're talking about even if it crackles and pops. As above, 15, ben Mishna Berura. Va'afilu im einoi v'chulu. Right, we said so, and even if it's not actually tied to the door itself, rather to the beam of the door, right? It's hanging from the lintel. Here's oiba mezuzah shacher yadelis. Or alternatively, if it's from not hanging from the briach, if it's not hanging from the lintel, but also let's say if it's hanging from the doorposts, same deal.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I was curious. I didn't think this yesterday, but I was curious. What does Google have for door
wait,
bar?
I said I skipped one. I skipped it. Sorry.
What?
Oh, what were you saying?
I was just gonna say, Stam, what's a door bar? I don't know if it's just like nowadays or if this is what he's talking about, but Google has what's a door bar? It's the bar on the floor that basically that covers the gap between the doorway and the floor. But I don't think that's what it's talking about.
No, because a briach
they didn't used to have that.
I believe what he's talking about
the beam. Right.
Remember, if you think about framing.
Yeah, because we don't. What do we care about the floor, especially back then?
Framing, the way is in oldie timey construction, they didn't necessarily have all these. I mean, maybe in palaces and things like this, they had moldings and this not. But generally, the beam there was a beam that's on top, right? And let's say you have boards, right? The walls are made out of boards, but the door needs to be in something more sturdy. So you would have a beam, right? When they made the frame out of like whatever they made it out of.
Even nowadays, that's the reason why in an earthquake or in a hurricane, whatever, you go, one of the places to go is to go in the doorway because it's reinforced with the beam, with the door bar.
In those cases, it wasn't even a 2x4. It's probably a beam, like a,
Right. Stronger, starker thing. Yeah. So you're saying, so that's or right, but you skipped the tesvav, right? I feel it in
I jumped, that was 17. Even if it is not tied to the door itself, that you would think that when he's saying you have to tie it, he means that you have to tie it to the door itself, because otherwise it's not so evident that you're using it for a lock. But he's saying no, being that it's a bulbous head peg, and it sort of looks like a clear already, just the fact that you have a string, and even though it's not tied to the door itself, that's still enough to make it, because it doesn't have to be necessarily that it's recognized as a lock. It just has to be recognized as a vessel of some sort. That's not an implement for building, or it's not a materials for building. And therefore using it, so you would think that using it as a lock would still give the impression of baina because it's not tied to the door, so you wouldn't know. But no, he says Okay, then we went to Bria Chadal. It's the next one, right? The mezuzah is also good enough.
Yeah, you have Yuzain.
Yeah. So, and by the way, this he brings that it's apparently the Alter Rebbe holds that way as well. That doing it to the mezuzah is equivalent to the. In other words, here he only mentions the bar, the lintel. The Mishna Berura brings that it's also the mezuzah is fine, and the Alter Rebbe seems to hold that way as well. That the mezuzah is the same as the lintel. 17. So now, however, what if it does? It does not widen out at the head. Is that what he's talking about? Yeah. Mishum the kavon the ein ala neged teras kli, being that it does not fall under the rules of a vessel.
How executive producer doing?
Baruch Hashem, he's doing very well, especially after his recent birthday.
Oh wow, we didn't know about this. Mazel tov, Ira.
Before we get
birthday to Ira. Ira, everyone asks about you here all the time.
Before we get off, we just want to mention once more that this was in the course of the Fush Lema for Yesivitzim Simachasi and Baruch Mendel Ben Bela.
Amen.
And Zagi mentioned.
Kind of mamish. Yossi, Boker Tov.